Welcome to Double Take. I'm Jigster, and this is a look into the Back 4 Blood beta, developed by Turtle Rock Studios, the studio behind the cult co-op classic, Left Evolve. That game so well remembered that Turtle Rock can mention Left Evolve's name to market Back 4 Blood. At first glance, this beta feels like a genuinely solid entry into the co-op genre. But the more you look, you notice that some things just don't line up. Let's get started with the game's presentation and controls. Back 4 Blood is a 4-player co-op FPS, set in a not-gonna-use-the-Z-word apocalypse, with a premise pretty similar to the 2006 film Slither, where parasitic worms take control of people and mutate them into horrid Cronenberg monstrosities. Look at that thing there. Look at that. It's awful. Ugh. The game's primary goal is to utilize teamwork to survive a mostly linear point A to B, while scavenging supplies along the way to take down special enemies and overcome mass hordes of
Insert non-Z name here.
And if that formula sounds familiar, then you're probably thinking of the cult classic Earthfall: The Invasion. Although fans of Earthfall might have a difficult adjustment period, as the Back 4 Blood beta demands a high degree of teamwork, as opposed to a more run-and-gun playstyle. But to anyone looking to scratch that very specific Earthfall itch, you'll find that here as long as you're not expecting it to be Earthfall 3. Or, I guess, just Earthfall 2, because they didn't make one, but you get the point. Game feel and controls. There was a lot of time spent between the closed and open beta. And with crossplay and cross progression, we were able to test it on PS5, PS4 Pro, what was not too long ago considered a high-end PC, and an original Xbox One. Or an Xbox One. Not, you know, the one. That one. With keyboard and mouse, the game responds exactly as you'd expect. Point and click equals dead Zed.
Zed's dead, baby. Zed's dead.
However, with controllers, you're gonna want to play with the settings right out of the gate. Specifically, under controller settings, you're gonna want to turn target snapping off. While this setting may work in something like Red Dead Redemption, this is an incredibly awkward design decision for a first-person shooter. And if anyone from Turtle Rock is listening, I implore you to turn this off by default for the official release.
You implore me? You implore me?
It's just weird, and it makes the game feel janky to anyone who ever played a game with aim down sight prior. And for a lot of casual folks, the first impression is what sticks. And out of the box, or download queue rather, it's unfortunate that aiming, something you do constantly, just feels that bad. However, with target snapping turned off, the game controls actually feel very smooth across all platforms. The haptic feedback on PS5 is excellently well implemented here. Trying out guns while on the range felt so diverse, and even swapping weapons made the controller feel like it was shifting around inside. Really awesome attention to detail. Weapons are responsive, moving feels grounded. Comparatively, it feels and actually kind of looks pretty similar to a Far Cry game. You shoot things and they go down. It's definitely not the pinnacle of FPSs, but it's a very Far Cry from the worst feeling PC to console port that gets put out there.
He did the same joke about 3 times already. I don't think it's funny anymore.
So kudos on that, Turtle Rock. You definitely almost nailed it. With that said, however, here's some constructive criticism for gamepads. The player should have the option to completely remap their controller to best suit their comfortability. But Back 4 Blood's remapping options restrict some buttons like L1 or LB, which is designated strictly to the game's ping, which can't be swapped out. Turtle Rock has mentioned during their streams that due to button limitations, certain basic features like a flashlight toggle can't be implemented.
but it was a thing where like if people didn't turn their flashlights on, then it was really frustrating. And there's a certain number of buttons available on the controller and stuff like that. So it's one of those things where like we're like, well, what if we have flashlights, but people don't have to worry about turning them on or off? That just seems like it would be better.
Which is kind of a weird statement when the beta didn't use up on the D-pad for anything at all. But even then, they could just bind both the ping and the radio commands to the same button, quickly tapping to ping and holding down to bring up the radio menu. Combining inputs could free up space for a very much needed 180-degree quick turn input. Much like Back 4 Blood's predecessor left Resident Evil, a quick turn is incredibly useful, especially when you're frequently surrounded by hordes of the
ghouls.
On PC, however, mouse sensitivity completely nullifies this issue. With how often hordes occur, being able to have the same agency to handle situations despite your platform choice is a necessity. Which brings us to the next topic: gameplay mechanics and player agency. Back 4 Blood's mechanics promote a rich, team-centric environment. However, B4BB doesn't do a great job of explaining its systems. But essential for success on the more engaging difficulties, your team is going to need to build up roles to support the group. This is done by the game's card system. At the end of each level, you'll gain points that you can spend on different supply lines, which can be found at the game's hub, Fort Hope. Each of these supply lines contains little padding goodies like sprays, emblems, backgrounds, but most importantly, better ability cards that get stronger the more you progress. You take these ability cards and build what they call decks. As you play a run, you draw a card at the start of each level, slowly enhancing your abilities as you go through the act. These cards can include some real game changers, like carrying 2 primary weapons instead of a secondary. There's also cards that allow you to break out of grabs entirely on your own, along with more basic ones that add to your base stats, like stamina or ammo capacity. Overall, this system is a pretty positive design choice. It adds depth to how you choose to approach each run. You can set yourself up to be the team's medic by selecting healing-specific cards, or go complete crowd control by upgrading melee and stamina. Anytime I found myself disliking an aspect of the mechanics, I learned that there was a card to remedy whatever I was experiencing. With how integral the card system is, I hope that Turtle Rock implements a way to test out your deck in Fort Hope to best synergize your complete build outside of an actual run attempt. These cards work best when they feel like a genuine enhancement to your base character. But unfortunately, some cards feel like they were plucked straight out of your base character's stats. Specifically, the Marathon Runner card, which affects your strafe and backpedal movement speeds. With this added, the game's movement becomes way more standard in terms of responsiveness, like it just should have been that way to begin with. This is also prevalent in several cards that buff healing and reduce trauma damage, aka the game's debilitation system that reduces your max overall health. Trauma is meant to enforce punishment for those straying away from the group. This can be healed by pills and trauma stations, which are hidden across each level. However, if you're someone who primarily jumps in a quick play, you're in for a rough time. You could deck yourself out to give you more agency for the run, but the rate at which you acquire card buffs and the limitation on the number of cards you can get make quick play a real slog if randoms aren't synergized, which was nearly every game of the beta. Side effects of solo queuing may include some, if not all, of the following issues: constant low ammo availability if your team is using similar weapons, waiting for up to 4 minutes every round for someone to pick a card, no one is grouping up to funnel a heaping horde of ghouls, consistent high trauma cap for picking offensive cards to defensive ones because no one is watching each other's back throughout the entire goddamn run, waiting for people to finish shopping after having to wait 4 minutes for them to pick their cards, and much more. Quick play could become enjoyable by tweaking the game's difficulty settings instead of dampening the axe level of engagement. Difficulty variations and player engagement. Back 4 Blood has 3 difficulties to tackle. Survivor, which can be best described as a watered-down version of what's enjoyable about Back 4 Blood. The ghouls typically only draw shamble or cards that make them briskly jog, and the volume of enemies is also drastically reduced. It's like particular gameplay modifiers aren't present in order to make it easier, but that also made it just, well, dull to play. Veteran difficulty definitely kicks things off with a full range of corruption cards that just have the thickest, juiciest hordes you have ever seen. Hot damn, it is hot in this booth. With friendly fire enabled, you'll need 4 people communicating together to pull through. And then there's Nightmare, aka we could barely leave the safe room, so fuck that noise. Instead of restricting corruption cards, they should be available across all difficulties. The more severe difficulty, the more corruption cards that get thrown at you. This way, despite the difficulty, players can still get that core experience of Back 4 Blood, and don't have to slog through what's essentially a lamer version of the intended game. The difficulty instead could be based on limitations to the max trauma damage a player can receive, to create a consistent level of engagement, despite difficulty choice. For example, in Survivor, each player can get a manageable cap of 40%, Veteran at a stricter cap of 60%, and Nightmare at a debilitating cap of 80%. This change would open up quick play on easier difficulties by reducing the max punishment for a less coordinated party, while reinforcing the team and role dynamic on the higher difficulties. To mix things up with Survivor, they could set all weapon rarities default to purple. Such a change would make Survivor a place where players can play around with the handling of each weapon without having to worry about swapping them out for higher tiered loot, essentially making whatever they find, well, viable. While also introducing slight team damage of say 5 to 10% to keep a sense of trigger discipline as a constant mindset. This would also keep certain ability cards, like this one for example, relevant despite your mode choice. Veteran would largely remain unchanged outside of the proposed trauma cap, while including the weapon rarity looting system, along with the same amount of corruption cards thrown at you from the beta. Lastly, to toughen up Nightmare, I suggest that the corruption cards dealt against you are hidden from the players for the run, turning down enemy damage a smidge to say 25% instead of 35%, so that an organized team of 4 can still make it past the first room without being severely debilitated almost immediately. But in better news, it's been confirmed that medpacks will heal trauma in the official release, which is really needed. It was super weird that pills were more effective at healing trauma while costing way less than a med pack. Honestly, awesome change. Thank you. Versus mode. Compared to Back 4 Blood's contemporaries in the last 11 years, they introduced a competitive PvP mode that was honestly surprisingly enjoyable. You and up to 3 of your friends have a little area where you can blast each other's brains out with a bunch of different weapons on a table. It definitely had some issues with spawn camping or any implementation on an objective whatsoever, but it's a good time, especially when you make your own rules and try to snipe one another from across the map. Well, more fun if you're on PC, because, you know. Oh, there's also the swarm mode. It's okay when you consistently have 2 teams of 4. The specials feel genuinely fun to play, but the mode itself just doesn't tickle my fancy. There's way too much waiting between rounds, from picking cards to setting up with weapons and traps, and if you're infected, you're just sitting there. If they were going to implement a PvP element, I would have much rather seen an objective style mode. This way, the PvP is more based on their survivor team's ability to work together, to juggle tasks like transporting supplies while defending themselves, rather than just seeing who can hold up in the most exploitable area of the map the longest. Alternatively, with Turtle Rock's work on Evolve, it would have been cool to see them tackle another asymmetrical 3v1 PvP mode, where 4 people start an act, and 1 is randomly selected to essentially take on the role of the AI director for that level. They could say choose corruption cards, place traps, set car alarms, release hordes, spawn in specials, and maybe even take control over them. The next AI director is selected by whatever survivor did the best in that level. If the AI director happens to win, they play again in the next level of that act. Evolve had solid ideas, and it's a shame it fell apart the way it did, but it would be interesting to see what the minds behind it can do with another asymmetric PvP this time around. Thankfully, Back 4 Blood doesn't seem to be going in the same direction as Evolve with its DLC content, opting in for more traditional DLC like Vermintide or World War Z did, where only the host will need to own the DLC for everyone else to play, preventing the player base from being divided once additional content is inevitably released. Which leads us to our last topic, content available at launch. It's been confirmed that the launch of Back 4 Blood will include 4 acts, and based on this tweet by Back 4 Blood's community manager, Rosalind Tai, we're looking roughly between 8 to 16 levels per act, which seems pretty packed for a full price release. The game will launch with 8 different playable cleaners, and based on the beta, expect their dialogue to be pretty top notch. Well, for the most part at least. Characters will acknowledge one another and have opinions on who's on the team. If you're on a level a cleaner has a lore connection to, they'll drop background dialogue about it. And if they are not present on the run, someone will acknowledge that that specific character isn't there. It's another excellent attention to detail that expands the atmosphere of the world that they're building. And Back 4 Blood does a lot of world building with mise-en-scène. Walls have writing on them from other survivors, some of which are even great Easter eggs to other horror franchises.
I kick ass for the Lord.
The game's lore also bleeds into the game's mechanics with a store system and in-game currency that just makes sense. Cleaners make supply runs and establish secure checkpoints to make supply runs easier. Although I wish there were options to sell your items, it's nice that with the store, you don't run into the issue of people hoarding the spawn items. You can also see this in Back 4 Blood's Gore and Viscera, where base ammo types just put ghouls down, picking up an ammo attachment will turn them into a giant meat heap. It's an excellent detail that makes attachments worthwhile. However, it's unfortunate you can't remove them once attached. Hopefully that's not the case for the full release. However, this lore attention to detail isn't always as consistent. For example, with the birds alerting hordes, it doesn't make any conceptual sense how crows squawking alert enemies when the non-stop gunfire and explosions don't. It would have made more sense to make it like a nest of worm eggs or something to that like, that releases pheromones or a high-pitched shriek when stepped on or shot. This could further expand the ecology of your base enemies, while contextually having the horde trigger make more sense. My god, that took forever to make, dude. And that voice takes everything out of me going, hey, my name is Jigstab, my god. Anyways, looking forwards to playing early come October 8th. And looking forward to playing with my friends who get it on the 12th. Looking forwards to seeing what more Back 4 Blood has to offer. Consider subscribing and maybe I'll make more than one video a year. Maybe. Anyway, here's some bloopers of my voice for you. Back 4 Evolves where parasitic as the Back 4 Blood beta as the Back 4 Blood beta this is the Back 4 Blood beta. Don't you know? A lot of time spent. There was a lot of time spent between. This is an incredibly awkward design decision. And if anyone from Turtle Rock, but Back 4 Blood, a quick turn is an incredibly useful. Much like Back 4 Blood, enhancing your abilities as you go through the act. Oh god. Water break. Keeping my pipes hydrated. With friendly fire enabled, you'll need 4 people communicating. It's so hot in here. You have no idea. You have no idea. It's so fun. Oh, but it nullifies the sound. Oh. Okay, that's it.